The rain was coming down hard that Tuesday evening when Daniel pulled up to Antonio's restaurant in his black Tesla. He didn't usually eat alone at fancy places, but tonight was different. His phone had been buzzing all day with calls from reporters, wanting to interview him about his latest business deal. Sometimes being worth $2 billion felt more like a burden than a blessing. Daniel Chen had built his tech company from nothing. 15 years ago, he was just another college kid with big dreams and empty pockets. Now, at 33, he owned one of the fastest-growing software companies in the country. But success came with a price. He barely had time for friends, family, or even a simple dinner without someone wanting something from him. The restaurant was busy despite the weather. Antonio's was the kind of place where business deals were made over expensive wine and perfect steaks. Daniel chose a corner table where he could work on his laptop while eating. Tomorrow's board meeting would decide if they were going to buy a smaller company, and he needed to review the numbers one more time. He was deep in thought, staring at spreadsheets on his screen, when someone walked up to his table. "Good evening, sir. Can I start you off with something to drink tonight?" Daniel looked up from his laptop, ready to order his usual water and coffee combination. But the words got stuck in his throat. The face staring back at him was older now, with lines around the eyes and gray streaks in the hair. But those eyes? He knew those eyes. "Tommy?" Daniel's voice came out as barely a whisper. The server's pen stopped moving on his notepad. His eyes went wide, and for a moment neither man said anything. The busy restaurant seemed to fade away around them. "Danny? Danny Chen? Oh my God, is that really you?" Tommy Rodriguez had been Daniel's best friend all through high school. They had spent countless hours together, studying for tests, playing video games, and talking about their dreams for the future. Tommy had always been the popular one, the guy everyone liked, the one who was going to become a teacher and change the world. Daniel had been the quiet, nerdy kid who spent most of his time with computers. Now here they were, 15 years later, in the most unexpected place possible. "I can't believe it's you," Daniel said, standing up from his chair. He wanted to hug his old friend, but something about the situation felt awkward. Daniel was wearing a suit that cost more than most people made in a month. Tommy was wearing the standard black shirt and pants of a restaurant server. "Yeah, it's me," Tommy said with a nervous laugh. "Man, look at you. You look successful." Tommy's voice had a tiredness to it that Daniel didn't remember. In high school, Tommy had been full of energy, always laughing, always making jokes. The man standing in front of him now looked worn down by life. "What are you doing here?" Daniel asked, then immediately realized how that sounded. "I mean, I didn't know you were in Chicago." "Been here about 5 years now," Tommy said, glancing around the restaurant. "Listen, I should probably take your order. My manager gets upset if we spend too much time talking to customers." Daniel looked around and saw other servers moving quickly between tables. The dinner rush was in full swing, and Tommy was right. He needed to do his job. "Of course, sorry. Just get me a coffee for now, and maybe, when do you get off work? We should catch up properly." Tommy checked his watch. "My shift ends at 10:30. But Danny, you don't have to wait around for me. I'm sure you're busy. With, well, whatever it is you do now." "I own a software company," Daniel said simply, "and I'm not busy tonight. I'll wait." Tommy nodded and walked away to get the coffee. Daniel watched him go, noticing how Tommy moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been doing this job for a while. This wasn't a temporary gig or a side job. This was Tommy's life. Daniel tried to go back to his laptop, but he couldn't concentrate. His mind kept wandering back to high school, to all the memories he shared with Tommy. Tommy had been the one who convinced him to join the computer club. Tommy had been the one who helped him with his confidence when he was too scared to talk to anyone. Tommy had believed in him when Daniel didn't even believe in himself. When Tommy came back with the coffee, Daniel couldn't help but ask more questions. "So you're living in Chicago now? What brought you here?" "My wife's family is here," Tommy said quietly. "We moved here when she got sick. Better hospitals here than back home." "Sick?" Daniel felt his stomach drop. "Cancer. She's doing better now, but..." Tommy shrugged. Medical bills, you know. That's why I'm here at night. I work at a diner in the mornings, too. Daniel felt like someone had punched him in the gut. While he had been building his empire, traveling the world, buying expensive cars and houses, his best friend from high school was working 2 jobs just to pay medical bills. Tommy, I had no idea. If I had known. Hey, it's not your fault, Tommy said with a small smile. Life happens, right? We all make our choices. But Daniel knew it wasn't about choices. It was about luck, about opportunities, about being in the right place at the right time. Tommy had always been smarter than him, kinder than him, more deserving of success. Yet here Tommy was, serving tables while Daniel sat in a corner counting his billions. How many kids do you have? Daniel asked. Tommy's face lit up for the first time that evening. 2. Sophia is 12 and she's amazing at math. Reminds me of you in high school, actually. And Miguel is 8. He needs some extra help with school, but he's a good kid. They're both good kids. Daniel could hear the love in Tommy's voice when he talked about his children. But he could also hear the worry, the stress of a father who was doing everything he could but wasn't sure if it was enough. Listen, I really should get back to work, Tommy said, looking around the restaurant again. But it was great seeing you, Danny, really great. Yeah, you too, Daniel said. And Tommy? I'm serious about catching up later. I'll be here when you get off. Tommy smiled and walked away to help other customers. Daniel watched him work for the rest of the evening. Tommy was good at his job, friendly with customers, quick with orders, always professional. But Daniel could see the exhaustion in his movements, the weight of working long hours just to make ends meet. At 10:30, Daniel was still there. Tommy came out of the kitchen having changed out of his work clothes into jeans and an old jacket. You actually waited, Tommy said, sounding surprised. Of course I waited. Come on, let's go somewhere we can really talk. As they walked out of the restaurant together, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about how different their lives had become. He had everything money could buy, but sitting across from his old friend tonight, he realized he had lost something important along the way. He had lost touch with the people who mattered most. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still wet and shiny under the streetlights. Daniel looked at Tommy walking beside him and made a decision. He didn't know what he was going to do yet, but he knew he couldn't just walk away and pretend this meeting never happened. Some things in life were more important than business deals and board meetings. Some things were worth fighting for. Daniel couldn't sleep that night. He kept thinking about Tommy, about the tired look in his eyes, about the way his shoulders seemed to carry the weight of the world. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his old friend serving tables at Antonio's, smiling politely at customers who probably never gave him a second thought. At 3 a.m, Daniel gave up trying to sleep. He went to his home office and did something he hadn't done in years. He tried to find his old high school friends online. Most of their social media profiles were either private or hadn't been updated in months. But Tommy's was different. It was sparse, with only a few family photos and updates about his kids' school events. The photos showed a small apartment, birthday parties that looked like they were planned on a tight budget, and 2 beautiful children who had their father's kind eyes. Daniel stared at one photo for a long time. It showed Tommy and his wife at what looked like a hospital, both of them trying to smile for the camera. The caption just said, "Good news today," with a heart emoji. The next morning, Daniel couldn't concentrate on work. His assistant kept asking if he was feeling okay because he seemed distracted during meetings. Finally, around lunchtime, Daniel made a decision that surprised even himself. He drove back to Antonio's. "We're not open for lunch on Tuesdays," the hostess told him when he walked in. "I'm not here to eat," Daniel said. "I need to speak with your manager." 5 minutes later, he was sitting across from Mrs. Patterson, a woman in her 50s who had been running Antonio's for over a decade. She seemed nervous talking to someone who was clearly wealthy and important. "Is there a problem with our service?" she asked. "If one of our staff members did something wrong?" "No, nothing like that," Daniel said quickly. "Actually, I wanted to ask about one of your servers, Tommy Rodriguez. How long has he been working here?" Mrs. Patterson relaxed a little. "Oh, Tommy. He's one of our best employees. Been with us almost 3 years now. Never missed a shift, never complains, customers love him. Why do you ask? We're old friends from high school. I ran into him last night and I was just curious about, well, how he's doing. Mrs. Patterson's expression softened. That boy works harder than anyone I've ever seen. He's here 5 nights a week and I know he has another job during the day. Sometimes he looks so tired I worry he's going to collapse, but he never asks for time off. Another job? Yeah, he works the morning shift at Mickey's Diner downtown. Gets off there at 2, then comes straight here for the dinner shift. I've told him he doesn't need to work so many hours, but he says he needs the money. She paused. His wife was really sick for a while, cancer. I heard the medical bills were pretty rough on them. Daniel felt that punch in the gut feeling again. Is she okay now? From what Tommy's told me, she's doing much better. But you know how it is. With those kinds of medical expenses, takes years to pay them off even with insurance. After leaving the restaurant, Daniel drove to Mickey's Diner. It was a small, old-fashioned place with red vinyl booths and a counter where truckers and construction workers grabbed quick meals. He ordered coffee and sat in a corner booth watching the morning crowd. At exactly 2 o'clock, he saw Tommy come out from the kitchen untying his apron. He looked exhausted, and Daniel realized this was what Tommy looked like between his 2 jobs, running on caffeine and determination. Daniel followed Tommy's beat-up Honda Civic through the city, staying far enough back that Tommy wouldn't notice him. He wasn't proud of following his friend, but he needed to understand Tommy's life better. The Honda stopped at a small grocery store in a neighborhood Daniel had never visited before. Through the store window, Daniel watched Tommy carefully, compare prices on everything he bought. A loaf of bread, some milk, sandwich meat, and a bag of apples. The kind of shopping trip where every dollar mattered. When Tommy got to the checkout, Daniel saw him count out exact change from a small stack of bills. Tommy's apartment building was nothing like Daniel's penthouse. It was old but clean, with a small playground out front where a few kids were playing. Daniel sat in his car for a few minutes, looking up at the building and wondering which apartment was Tommy's. That weekend, Daniel did something he never thought he would do. He hired a private investigator. Not to spy on Tommy, but to understand his situation better. Daniel knew that if he was going to help his old friend, he needed to know exactly what he was dealing with. The report came back 3 days later, and it broke Daniel's heart. Tommy Rodriguez worked 65 hours a week between his 2 jobs. His wife, Maria, had been battling breast cancer for 2 years. She was now in remission, but the treatment had cost over $200,000 even with their insurance. They were making payments on the medical debt, but at their current rate it would take them 15 years to pay it off. Their daughter Sophia was 12 and incredibly gifted in mathematics. Her teachers said she had the potential to get into any college she wanted, but there was no money saved for her education. Their son Miguel was 8 and had been diagnosed with a mild form of autism. He needed special therapy and educational support that cost $300 a month, money the family didn't have. But the most interesting part of the report was something Daniel hadn't expected. Tommy had been working with Miguel, developing his own teaching methods to help his son learn. Other parents in their neighborhood had started asking Tommy to help their kids too. Tommy had created a whole system of teaching techniques that seemed to work amazingly well with children who struggled in traditional classrooms. The investigator had talked to some of these parents. One mother said Tommy had helped her son go from failing math to getting A's in just 3 months. Another said Tommy's methods had given her daughter confidence she'd never had before. But Tommy was doing all of this for free in his spare time because he couldn't bear to charge struggling families. Daniel learned something else that made him feel even worse about his own success. On weekends, when most people were relaxing, Tommy was doing landscaping work for extra money. He mowed lawns, trimmed hedges, and cleaned up yards for $20 an hour. Every penny went toward Miguel's therapy or Sophia's school supplies. The report also revealed Tommy's biggest dream. He had written a detailed curriculum for his teaching methods, hoping to maybe start a tutoring business someday. Several education experts had looked at his work informally and called it revolutionary. But Tommy didn't have the money to patent his methods, test them properly, or turn them into a real business. Daniel closed the report and leaned back in his office chair. Here was his best friend from high school, working himself to death just to survive, while sitting on an idea that could help thousands of kids. Meanwhile, Daniel had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. That night, Daniel called his lawyer and his accountant. He had an idea, but it was complicated. He couldn't just write Tommy a check. His friend's pride would never allow it. And Daniel didn't want to make Tommy feel like a charity case. What Daniel wanted to do was give Tommy what he deserved. Not a handout, but an opportunity. Tommy had something valuable to offer the world. Daniel just needed to figure out how to make that happen without destroying their friendship in the process. As Daniel sat in his empty penthouse that night, looking out at the city lights, he realized something important. All his success meant nothing if he couldn't use it to help the people who mattered most. Tommy had always been there for him in high school. Now it was Daniel's turn to be there for Tommy. The question was, how do you help someone who's too proud to accept help? Daniel spent the next 2 weeks thinking about Tommy every single day. The private investigator's report sat on his desk, and he must have read it a dozen times. Each time he discovered new details that made him more determined to help, but also more worried about doing it the wrong way. The hardest part was acting normal around his own life. During board meetings, he found himself thinking about Tommy rushing between 2 jobs. When he ate at expensive restaurants, he remembered the careful way Tommy had counted out exact change at the grocery store. When his personal trainer complained about Daniel seeming distracted during workouts, Daniel almost laughed. How could he explain that he was thinking about a friend who probably hadn't had time for exercise in years? Finally, Daniel made a decision that surprised everyone around him. He cleared his schedule for a week and told his assistant he was doing research for a new project. It wasn't exactly a lie. Daniel's first stop was Miguel's school. He didn't go inside. He wasn't ready to risk running into Tommy. But he sat in his car and watched the kids come out at the end of the day. When he saw a boy who looked like the photos from Tommy's social media, Daniel felt his heart skip a beat. Miguel Rodriguez was a small kid with dark hair and his father's gentle eyes. But Daniel could see something else too. The way Miguel walked, by himself, how the other kids seemed to ignore him. The careful way he navigated through the crowd. This was a child who was different, who probably struggled every day in ways that other kids couldn't understand. Daniel watched Tommy pick up Miguel, and he could see the love between father and son immediately. Tommy knelt down to Miguel's level, and they talked about something that made Miguel smile. Then Tommy helped his son into the old Honda, and they drove away together. The next day, Daniel did something even more surprising. He called the principal of Miguel's school and set up a meeting. He introduced himself as a businessman interested in funding educational programs for children with special needs. Principal Johnson was a kind woman in her 60s who had been working in education for over 30 years. She welcomed Daniel into her office and seemed genuinely excited to talk about helping kids like Miguel. "We have several students who could benefit from more individualized attention," she explained. "But funding is always an issue. The district does what it can, but there's only so much money to go around." Daniel asked about Miguel specifically, without mentioning that he knew the family. "Oh, that sweet boy," Principal Johnson said with a smile. "He's made incredible progress this year. His father has been working with him at home, and honestly, I've never seen teaching methods quite like what that man uses." Miguel went from barely speaking in class to participating in group discussions. "It's remarkable." "What kind of methods?" Daniel asked, even though he already knew from the investigator's report. "Well, Mr. Rodriguez developed this system where he uses everyday objects to teach math concepts. Instead of abstract numbers on a blackboard, Miguel learns multiplication by arranging toy cars or counting pieces of fruit. And for reading, Mr. Rodriguez created these story cards that connect to Miguel's interests. The boy loves trains, so his father made up math problems about train schedules and reading exercises about different types of locomotives." Principal Johnson pulled out a folder from her desk. "Actually, Mr. Rodriguez shared some of his materials with us. Our special education teacher has started using similar techniques with other students, and the results are amazing. We've had 3 kids moved from remedial classes back into regular classrooms this year. Daniel looked through the folder, seeing handmade worksheets and carefully drawn illustrations. Every page showed hours of work, love, and creativity. This wasn't just a father helping his son. This was a natural teacher creating something special. Has Mr. Rodriguez ever considered becoming a professional educator? Daniel asked. Principal Johnson's expression became sad. I've asked him that same question. The man has a gift for teaching, especially with children who learn differently. But he works 2 jobs just to support his family. He doesn't have time to go back to school for a teaching degree, and he certainly can't afford to take the pay cut that comes with starting over in education. After leaving the school, Daniel drove to Sophia's school. Tommy's daughter was in 7th grade at a public middle school across town. Daniel used the same approach, meeting with the guidance counselor to discuss programs for gifted students, as Chen, no relation to Daniel despite the shared last name, was passionate about helping bright kids reach their potential. We have several students who could benefit from advanced programs, she said. But again, it comes down to resources. The really good programs cost money that many families don't have. When Daniel asked about Sophia Rodriguez specifically, Mrs. Chen's face lit up. Sophia is exceptional, truly gifted in mathematics and science. She's already working at a high school level in algebra, and she's only 12. Her teachers think she could easily get into any college she wants, possibly with full academic scholarships. What's holding her back? Daniel asked. Honestly, confidence and opportunity. Sophia is brilliant, but she doesn't believe in herself yet, and her family can't afford the kind of enrichment programs that would really help her shine. Math camps, science competitions, SAT prep courses, all of that costs money. Without those experiences, even the smartest kids can get overlooked by college admissions officers. Mrs. Chen showed Daniel some of Sophia's work. The girl had solved complex problems that impressed even Daniel, who had studied advanced mathematics in college. But more than that, Sophia had shown creativity in her solutions, finding new ways to approach difficult concepts. There's something else, Mrs. Chen added quietly. Sophia has been tutoring some of the younger kids here at school. She uses techniques that her father taught her, and the kids she works with have shown remarkable improvement. I've never seen a 12-year-old who could teach like that. That evening, Daniel sat in his office with all the information he had gathered. Tommy wasn't just a hard-working father struggling to get by. He was a man with incredible natural talent for education, raising 2 children who had inherited his intelligence and creativity. All 3 members of the Rodriguez family had gifts that could benefit the world, but they were trapped by circumstances beyond their control. Daniel picked up his phone and called his head of human resources. Janet, I need you to research something for me. What would it cost to create an educational foundation? Something focused on helping children with learning differences? Janet was used to Daniel's unusual requests, but this one seemed to surprise her. Are you thinking about expanding into education? Maybe. What kind of staff would we need? What about funding? How do foundations like that usually operate? For the next hour, Janet walked Daniel through the basics. Creating a foundation wasn't complicated if you had enough money, which Daniel certainly did. The real challenge was finding the right people to run it, educators who understood both the academic side and the business side of helping kids. After hanging up, Daniel called his lawyer, then his accountant, then a friend who ran a successful charity. By the end of the week, Daniel had a plan. It wasn't perfect and it was definitely risky, but it was the best idea he could come up with. The foundation would be real, not just a way to help Tommy, but an actual organization dedicated to helping children with learning differences. Tommy would be offered the position of director, not because he was Daniel's friend, but because he was genuinely qualified for the job. His teaching methods would be studied, tested, and implemented in schools across the country. Sophia would be enrolled in a special program for gifted students, funded by the Foundation's scholarship program. Miguel would receive the therapy and support he needed, along with other children facing similar challenges. But Daniel knew the hardest part was still ahead of him. He had to convince Tommy to accept the opportunity without making it seem like charity. He had to present this as a business proposition, not a handout from an old friend. Most importantly, he had to make Tommy believe that he deserved this chance, that his struggles had created something valuable, and that the world needed what he had to offer. Daniel looked out his office window at the city below, thinking about all the children who could benefit from Tommy's teaching methods. This wasn't just about helping one family anymore. This was about changing lives. Daniel's hands were shaking as he walked into Antonio's restaurant for the third time in 2 weeks. Tonight was different, though. Tonight, he had a plan that could change everything for Tommy and his family. The question was whether Tommy would accept it. He requested Tommy's section again, and when his old friend approached the table, Daniel could see the confusion in his eyes. "Danny, you're becoming a regular here," Tommy said with a tired smile. "Everything okay?" "Actually, I was hoping we could talk after your shift again. I have something important to discuss with you." Tommy looked around the busy restaurant. It was Friday night, their busiest time, and Daniel could see the exhaustion in his friend's face. Tommy had probably been at the diner since 6 in the morning, and now he was facing another long evening of serving tables. "Sure, I guess, but Danny, if this is about what I think it might be about..." "It's not what you think," Daniel said quickly. "Just trust me, okay? Meet me at that coffee shop across the street when you get off." The rest of Tommy's shift felt like the longest 3 hours of Daniel's life. He tried to work on his laptop, but he couldn't concentrate. He ordered dinner he barely touched and coffee he didn't drink. Every few minutes he looked up to watch Tommy moving between tables, taking orders, refilling drinks, always professional despite how tired he must have been. At 11:15, Tommy walked into the coffee shop. He had changed out of his work uniform into jeans and a hoodie that had seen better days. Daniel was already sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee waiting. "You didn't have to buy me coffee," Tommy said as he sat down. "It's just coffee." "Tommy, relax." But Tommy didn't relax. He sat on the edge of his chair like he was ready to run at any moment. Daniel realized his friend was probably expecting him to offer money or a job at his company, something that would hurt Tommy's pride and damage their friendship. "Listen, Danny, before you say whatever you're going to say, I want you to know that I'm doing fine. We're managing okay, and I don't need..." "Tommy, stop." Daniel held up his hand. "You're not letting me talk, and what I have to say might surprise you." Daniel pulled out a folder from his briefcase. Inside were copies of all the materials he had gathered. Testimonials from teachers, examples of Tommy's work with Miguel, research about children with learning differences. "I've been doing some research lately about education," Daniel began. "Specifically about kids who learn differently than others. Did you know that 1 in 5 children has some kind of learning challenge? That's 20% of all kids in school." Tommy looked confused. "Okay, but what does that have to do with anything?" "Most of these kids don't get the help they need. Traditional teaching methods don't work for them, so they fall behind, lose confidence, and sometimes drop out entirely. It's a huge problem that affects millions of families." Daniel opened the folder and pulled out some statistics he had printed. "The thing is, there are teaching methods that work for these kids. Special techniques that can help them succeed just as much as any other student. But most schools don't know about these methods, and most teachers aren't trained to use them." "Danny, I'm not sure where you're going with this." "I'm getting there." Daniel pulled out copies of Tommy's handmade worksheets and teaching materials. "These look familiar?" Tommy's eyes went wide. "Where did you get those? Those are... How... Do you have my stuff?" "I talked to Miguel's principal, and Sophia's guidance counselor, and a few other people." Daniel saw Tommy's expression change, and he quickly continued. "Tommy, do you have any idea how impressed these people are with your work? Do you know what they said about your teaching methods?" Tommy was staring at his own materials like he had never seen them before. "These are just... I made these for Miguel. They're nothing special." "Nothing special?" Daniel pulled out a letter from Principal Johnson. "Listen to this. Mr. Rodriguez has developed the most effective teaching techniques for special needs children that I have seen in 30 years of education. His methods are innovative, practical, and produce remarkable results. Miguel has made more progress in 6 months than most children make in 2 years. Tommy was quiet, reading the letter Daniel had handed him. "There's more," Daniel continued. "Your daughter's guidance counselor says Sophia is already tutoring other kids using techniques you taught her. 3 children at Miguel's school have moved from special education classes back into regular classrooms because teachers are using your methods." "I don't understand," Tommy said quietly. "What are you trying to tell me?" Daniel took a deep breath. This was the moment that would either save their friendship or destroy it. "I want to start a foundation," he said. "An educational foundation focused on helping children with learning differences. I want to take your teaching methods, study them properly, and implement them in schools across the country." Tommy was staring at him now, not saying anything. "Need someone to run this foundation. Someone who understands these kids, who has actually developed techniques that work, who has experience making a real difference in children's lives." Daniel paused. "I want that person to be you." "Danny, before you say no, let me finish. This isn't charity. This isn't me giving you money because I feel sorry for you. This is a legitimate business proposition. I'm offering you a job because you're qualified for it. More qualified than anyone else I could find." Daniel pulled out another piece of paper. "The foundation would pay you a salary of $150,000 a year to start. You'd have a staff of researchers and educators working with you. You'd have a budget to test your methods properly and implement them in schools nationwide." Tommy was reading the job description Daniel had prepared, his eyes moving slowly down the page. "You'd travel to schools, train teachers, work with administrators. You'd help write curriculum and develop new materials. Most importantly, you'd help thousands of kids who are struggling the same way Miguel was struggling." "This is insane," Tommy said, but his voice was barely a whisper. "Is it? Tommy, you've already proven that your methods work. You've helped your own son, you've helped other kids in your neighborhood, and teachers are already using your techniques. All I'm doing is giving you the resources to help more children." Tommy looked up from the papers. "Why would you do this? Why would you start a whole foundation just to—" "Because these kids need help, and you're the person who can help them. Because your teaching methods are too valuable to keep hidden in one neighborhood. Because there are thousands of families out there dealing with the same challenges you've faced, and you have solutions that could change their lives." Daniel leaned forward across the table. "Tommy, I've talked to education experts who have looked at your work. They're calling it revolutionary. One professor at Northwestern said your approach could transform how we teach children with learning differences." Tommy was shaking his head. "I'm not a professor. I don't have a degree in education. I'm just a guy who works 2 jobs and tries to help his kid with homework. That's exactly why you're perfect for this job. You understand these children because you've lived with one. You understand their families because you are one of those families. You've developed these methods out of necessity, out of love, out of determination, to help your son succeed." Daniel pulled out one final piece of paper. It was a list of schools that had already expressed interest in piloting Tommy's methods. 12 schools in 3 states want to test your techniques in their classrooms. They're waiting for someone to show them how to do it properly. They're waiting for you. Tommy stared at the list for a long time without saying anything. Finally, he looked up at Daniel. "I need to talk to Maria about this. This is a lot to process." "Of course. Take all the time you need. But Tommy, I want you to know something. This foundation is going to happen whether you take the job or not. These kids need help, and I have the resources to make it happen. But it would be so much better if the person running it actually understood what these families go through." They sat in silence for a few minutes, both of them staring at the papers scattered across the table. $150,000, Tommy asked quietly. "To start, with performance bonuses and room for advancement. This would be a real career, Tommy, not just a job." Tommy folded the papers carefully and put them in his pocket. "I'll call you in a few days." As they walked out of the coffee shop together, Daniel felt hopeful for the first time in weeks. He had done everything he could. The rest was up to Tommy. 3 days felt like 3 months. Daniel checked his phone every 10 minutes waiting for Tommy's call. He tried to focus on work, but every meeting felt pointless compared to what was happening in his personal life. His assistant asked twice if he was feeling sick because he seemed so distracted. On Wednesday evening, Daniel's phone finally rang. Tommy's name appeared on the screen and Daniel's heart started racing. "Danny? It's me. Can we meet somewhere tonight? Maria wants to come. With me if that's okay." Daniel had never been more nervous about a dinner in his life. He suggested a quiet restaurant where they could talk privately, somewhere nicer than the coffee shop, but not so fancy that it would make Tommy and Maria uncomfortable. When Daniel arrived, Tommy and Maria were already sitting at a corner table. Maria Rodriguez was a small woman with kind eyes and graying hair that she wore pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked tired, but there was something strong about her that Daniel could see immediately. "You must be Danny," Maria said as he sat down. "Tommy has told me so much about you over the years." "All good things, I hope," Daniel said, trying to lighten the mood. He used to talk about his smart friend who was going to change the world with computers. Maria smiled. Looks like he was right. Tommy looked nervous, fidgeting with his napkin and glancing around the restaurant. "Danny, we've been talking about your offer for 3 days straight. We've looked at it from every angle, and honestly, it sounds too good to be true." Daniel's heart sank. He had been afraid of this. "But," Maria continued, "we also know that you're not the kind of person who would lie to us or make promises you couldn't keep. Tommy told me about who you were in high school, and I can see that same person sitting here now." "What Maria is trying to say," Tommy said, "is that we want to accept your offer. But we have some conditions." Daniel felt relief flood through his body. "Name them." "First, we want to start small, maybe pilot the program in just 2 or 3 schools to begin with. We want to make sure this actually works before we get too ambitious." "That makes perfect sense," Daniel said. "Second, I want to go back to school. I know you said I'm qualified for this job, but I want to get a proper education degree. I want to do this right." "The foundation will pay for your education," Daniel said immediately. "That's not even a question." Tommy and Maria looked at each other, and Daniel could see they had discussed this next part thoroughly. "There's something else," Maria said quietly. "Something Tommy hasn't told you yet." Daniel waited, not sure what to expect. "You know about Miguel's challenges, and you know about the teaching methods Tommy developed to help him," Maria continued. "But what you don't know is why Tommy is so passionate about helping these kids." Tommy took a deep breath. "Danny, do you remember senior year of high school? Do you remember when I started spending a lot of time at your house?" Daniel nodded. "You were there almost every day for a few months. I always wondered why, but I never asked." "There's something I never told you," Tommy said, his voice getting quieter. "Something I've never told anyone except Maria." The restaurant seemed to fade away around them as Tommy continued. "You were in a really dark place that year. Your parents were getting divorced, you were struggling with depression, and you were convinced that you were worthless. Do you remember that?" Daniel felt his stomach drop. He remembered that year all too well. It had been the worst time of his life. "I remember you talking about giving up. About how maybe the world would be better without you in it. You never said it directly, but I knew what you were thinking about." Daniel's hands started shaking. He had never talked to anyone about how close he had come to ending his life that year. "I was scared," Tommy continued. "I was 17 years old, and I was terrified that my best friend was going to hurt himself. So I decided I wasn't going to leave you alone. I came over every day after school. I called you every night. I even slept on your bedroom floor sometimes when I was really worried." Maria reached across the table and took Daniel's hand. "Tommy saved your life, Danny. He might not have known it at the time, but that's what he did." Daniel felt tears starting to form in his eyes. He remembered those months, remembered how Tommy had always been there, but he had never understood why. "You never knew," Tommy said softly. "You thought I was just being a good friend, hanging around because I had nothing better to do. But the truth is I was watching over you because I couldn't bear the thought of losing you. Tommy, I had no idea. The reason I'm so passionate about helping kids like Miguel, kids who are different or struggling, is because I know what it feels like to watch someone you care about suffer. I know what it's like to feel helpless when someone you love is in pain." Daniel was crying now, not caring who might see him in the restaurant. Every success you've achieved, every company you've built, every life you've touched through your business, none of that would have existed if you had given up that year. And you didn't give up partly because I refused to let you be alone with those dark thoughts. Maria squeezed Daniel's hand. So when you talk about helping Tommy, about giving him opportunities, you need to understand something. You're not just helping the man who saved your life. You're helping the man who made your life possible. They sat in silence for several minutes, all three of them processing the weight of what had just been shared. Finally, Daniel looked up at his old friend. Tommy, why are you telling me this now? Because I want you to know that accepting your offer isn't charity. It's not you helping poor old Tommy out of pity. It's two friends who have been helping each other for 20 years, continuing to help each other now. 6 months later, Daniel stood at the podium of the Grand Ballroom in the Chicago Hilton. The Rodriguez Educational Foundation's first annual gala was packed with educators, parents, and children whose lives had been changed by Tommy's teaching methods. The pilot program had been more successful than anyone had imagined. 12 schools in 3 states were now using Tommy's techniques, and the results were remarkable. Children who had been struggling for years were suddenly thriving. Parents who had lost hope were watching their kids discover confidence they never knew they had. Sofia Rodriguez, now 13, stood near the front of the audience wearing a beautiful dress that her family could finally afford. She had been accepted into a prestigious summer program for gifted students, fully funded by the Foundation's scholarship program. Miguel, now 9, was sitting next to his sister. No longer the quiet, struggling child Daniel had seen leaving school months ago. He was confident, happy, and excited about learning. Tommy and Maria sat at the head table, both of them glowing with pride and excitement. Tommy had started his education degree program and was already being recruited by universities who wanted to study his methods. Maria had gone back to work part-time as a nurse now that the family's financial situation was stable. Ladies and gentlemen, Daniel said into the microphone, most of you think I created this foundation to help my old friend Tommy Rodriguez. But tonight, I want to tell you the real story. The room grew quiet as Daniel looked out at the audience. 15. Years ago, I was a depressed, hopeless teenager who didn't think he had any reason to keep living. I was convinced that the world would be better off without me, but there was one person who refused to give up on me, who spent months making sure I was never alone with my darkest thoughts. Daniel's voice cracked slightly as he continued. That person was Tommy Rodriguez. He saved my life when we were 17 years old, and he probably doesn't even know it. Every success I've achieved, every business I've built, every dollar I've earned, it all exists because Tommy saw value in a broken kid when that kid couldn't see any value in himself. The audience was completely silent now. This foundation isn't charity. It's not me helping Tommy. It's me finally getting the chance to return a favor that's 20 years overdue. Tommy Rodriguez saved my life, and now he's saving the lives of hundreds of other children who just need someone to believe in them. Daniel looked directly at Tommy, who was wiping tears from his eyes. So when you hear about the Rodriguez Educational Foundation, remember that it's named after a man who understands that sometimes the most important thing you can do for another person is simply refuse to give up on them. The standing ovation lasted for 5 full minutes, but Daniel only had eyes for his old friend, the man who had saved his life and was now using that same compassion to save countless others. Today, the Rodriguez Educational Foundation operates in over 200 schools across 15 states. Tommy has completed his master's degree in education and has been invited to speak at conferences around the world. Sofia is studying engineering at MIT on a full scholarship, and Miguel is thriving in a specialized program that uses his father's techniques. But more importantly, thousands of children who might have given up on themselves have found hope, confidence, and success because one man refused to let his best friend face his darkest moments alone. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply show up for someone who needs you. Sometimes that's enough to change not just one life, but thousands.